my question into the Deputy Secretary, so that's the first time I've used the Atlantic Council's new technology. So any of you can do the same when they have an event. You press click and video yourself, and obviously I just finished working out, so I got that into him, and the Cargo Preference Act is similar to the Jones Act. I don't know if you know what the Jones Act is, but the president just did a 60-day waiver of that, requiring a U.S. flagship carrier to transport goods and services within the United States. The Cargo Preference Act is similar, but for getting goods overseas. And that's one of the most challenging things that I heard about when I was leading EXIM, because America wants to export a lot of goods, and we want our shipbuilding industry to be very successful, but we want to get those goods to market as soon as possible. So we'll see if the Deputy Secretary picks up that issue as he takes on economic competitiveness. But I'm so delighted to be here today with this distinguished panel as we discuss achieving strategic objectives through investment and development finance. If there's one takeaway from the Export-Import Bank, and again, I was chairman of EXIM from 2019 to 2021, they do a competitiveness report every year that identifies the biggest challenges for U.S. exporters. Also looks at the competitive landscape of what other foreign country export credit agencies are doing, and we have more than 120 of those around the world. And if there's one takeaway from the latest EXIM competitiveness report in the Atlantic Council's 2026 Freedom and Prosperity Atlas, it's that investment and development finance are now central tools of strategic competition. But their long-term success depends on whether they advance both freedom and prosperity. So fundamentally, the goal during my tenure at EXIM, and continues today under the current chairman, John Jovanovich, is U.S. financing supported projects that are grounded in transparency, high standards, and market principles, because these are the foundations that drive sustainable growth and trusted partnerships. And that's exactly what the Atlas states. If you pick up a copy of the Atlas and turn to page 18, there's a list of all the countries and how they are ranked. And EXIM does a list that's regularly updated as well as what is off-cover, things that we cannot finance. And the overlapping on the lowest ranking countries in the Atlas in EXIM's off-cover markets is overly striking. There are places where we can't finance are oftentimes the same places where institutions are the weakest. So this tells us something fundamental. Development finance just isn't about capital, it's about the conditions that make capital work, and that Deputy Secretary Landau outlined so well. So this is the strategic lens we're going to bring to this conversation, and why the Council's work on this effort is so important. So with that, I want to introduce our panel, Colin Buckley, who's Managing Director and General Counsel of the British International Investment, or BII. He was previously Executive Director at the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, which is a private $4 billion charitable foundation. And he began his career in international development working for the International Finance Corporation, and also joined the Millennium Challenge Corporation as country director for the Republic of Georgia. Next, we have Bethany Aquilina Brez, who is Vice President, Office of Foreign Policy at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, or as we say, DFC. So she leads DFC's work to advance foreign policy and national security through private capital mobilization. Previously, she was Chief of Staff for Prosper Africa, and when I was at EXIM, we were very much plugged into Prosper Africa. And so she oversaw strategy, operations, and foreign policy for the U.S. government's presidential level initiative. She also worked at DFC previously as Managing Director for Strategy and led their global partnerships. And she spent a decade at MCC, or Millennium Challenge Corporation. Next, we have Dan Petrie, who is now acting chief of staff at the Millennium Challenge Corporation. And when I was at XM, he also was at MCC. And as you may know, MCC focuses on infrastructure and economic development in emerging markets. And as acting chief of staff, he's the principal advisor to the CEO. And before joining MCC in 2016, he worked for Habitat for Humanity International, where he served as Director of Global Affairs and Advocacy. And at the end here, but not last by any means in far as work and efforts, is Jake Cusack, who is co-founder and managing partner of the Cross Boundary Group. And I know we'll hear more about what you actually do during the Q&A. But before founding this group, he was a Marine Corps officer and received the Bronze Star. And he also worked for Abraj Capital, and he's written for numerous publications, including the Wall Street Journal and New York Times. So with that, I want to kick off today's panel with a question for the group. And maybe we'll start at the end down there. Each of your institutions, including those that are not government, operate with different mandates, time horizons, and political masters. Within these existing parameters in mind, how can governments, specifically the US government, make it easier for the private sector to leverage government partnerships? So really taking what the Deputy Secretary was talking about to your own specific levels.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot, and thanks for having me. And I thought the Deputy Secretary did a great job of laying out the current reality, and you kind of get at it when you talk about different masters, because I think what we see right now is basically every deal is a blended finance deal, meaning that every investment has public and philanthropic and private capital, potential capital directly in the deal, has interactions with those sectors. And so in my view, there's not really such a thing as a standalone commercial deal or a pure development deal. You see an interaction across all these spheres in these transactions, and it's just smart investment, a smart investment technique to consider those externalities, those public goods, how it might relate to national security imperatives when you construct a potential transaction. Because it can create opportunities to leverage lower costs of capital, to leverage more favorable terms, to get support from different institutions in terms of addressing transaction costs. And so I think what you see across the board is that there's much more interaction between public and private sector in the US and in other countries right now than there has been historically. And I think that's a good thing. It's also a response to the competitive nature of global investments, in that there are more state-directed capital players out there. And so I think having these sort of conversations where you can understand the objectives of the different players in the room, lower the costs and the barriers to coordination between those players, can really unlock new investment opportunities.
Great. Well, thank you, Kim, and thanks to the Atlantic Council for convening this important conversation. Since its founding, MCC has approached this work a bit differently. The agency's core tenets are, I believe, exactly what this moment calls for. We combine large strategic infrastructure with challenging policy and institutional reforms to jumpstart key areas of an economy. So in short, we lay the public sector foundation to unlock private sector-led growth. By statute, our compacts are time-limited, transparent, with greater measures of accountability and shared cost burden. Our portfolio has evolved over the past year. We have stepped back in some countries, but we are taking advantage of new authority that Congress granted us to work in a wider set of countries. So in recent months, under the Deputy Secretary's leadership, we've invested more in the Indo-Pacific. We're in 3 new countries in the Western Hemisphere. We're also being much more intentional about some of the sectors that we're working in, securing our supply chains and critical minerals for one, but really leaning into this private sector piece, and how do we work better with US private sector is going to be a top priority for us. We're currently developing a new strategy I've got a draft of it here. It's still very much draft. Jake and Cross Boundary have been really helpful thought partners in this regard. But the goal is to be engaging with U.S. private sector much earlier in the process and much more often. The idea being to suss out where these opportunities are, where MCC and others within the U.S. government can be de-risking it or helping to enable it. As the Deputy Secretary said, the U.S. private sector is the most dynamic in the world. And so how do we set the table in these emerging markets so that a DFC or an EXIM or others within the private sector can capitalize? This goes beyond, for MCC at least, this goes beyond just a few procurement dollars. Of course, that's nice. We want to work more with U.S. businesses, but we're really trying to get at the heart of what is holding private sector back. And the Deputy Secretary asked this question. He's like, why is it not that more U.S. businesses are operating in some of these emerging markets? It's a really important question and one that we are trying to address. I'll give you just a quick example. In Zambia, that has not been the easiest place to work for U.S. businesses in recent years. In the agricultural sector in particular, U.S. companies, Cargill and others, have left. Why? Because the regulatory environment wasn't there. Their food reserve agency wasn't working the way it should. There were ad hoc bans on grain exports. Despite Zambia's potential to be a net exporter for the region, as part of MCC's efforts and our compact there, we are pleased to see that just last month, the Zambian parliament passed the third of 3 laws that are going to be getting at some of those constraints and opening it up for additional private sector investment. We're trying to do the same thing in the critical minerals sector there. So that's the kind of value proposition that I think MCC can bring, helping to set the table, helping to create the right enabling environment, helping to make sure those foundational investments are there. We've seen a lot of change this year, but I think the core tenets that make MCC special remain at the forefront.
Well, thank you to the Atlantic Council and to Kim as well. And this is a good segue from what Dan was saying on MCC, because the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation is really the U.S. government's investment arm. Our mandate is to advance economic development and advance U.S. foreign policy and national security through private capital mobilization. A lot of the work that the Millennium Challenge Corporation is doing and what Deputy Secretary Landau referenced this morning with the State Department is really essential to getting more of these private sector companies, more U.S. companies, into markets all over the world. And for DFC, where we come in is we do need to be working in markets, and the private sector needs to be working in markets where there is a good regulatory environment, where they can do business, where they know that they can invest their money and get their capital out and make a profit and contribute jobs and money to the economy for economic development. So our role as the U.S. government's investment arm is to really provide that financing. So through our tools such as debt, equity, political risk insurance, and project development finance, we are coming alongside and helping the private sector to increase their investments in markets all over the world. Through DFC's recent reauthorization in December, we are working in all the regions of the world, and we can work in pretty much every market. But there are some markets where it's been much harder for the private sector to come in for a variety of reasons, but some of that could be the cost of capital. Some of it could be risk, which we heard a little bit about earlier this morning as well. And so DFC's role is to really de-risk those investments, to come in, to encourage private sector investment. We know that private sector-led development is essential to growth. It is the way that countries grow. And it's really essential to getting more US companies into these markets as well, which is beneficial to the United States and to American taxpayers. So for DFC, we are partnering not only with the private sector and really driving that capital, we're partnering with British International Investment and working with other development finance institutions so that we can crowd in and co-finance these investments, bring more money to the table. We're working with the State Department, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and others who are really working on other parts of the entire investment. And again, it's really important for us to be doing this to secure supply chains, to increase access to goods and services, but to advance U.S. interests. And by doing that, we are also advancing the economic interests of these countries and creating jobs.
I think the question is there a tension between development and national security interests? And the temptation is to say no and to talk about win-wins and mutual interest and partnerships and all that. The truth is that often there is a tension. And what's important is recognizing where you have that tension, what exactly are you trying to achieve with that particular investment? If you don't know what you're trying to achieve, then what you end up with is trying to get everything. And the result of that is you generally get mediocre development, and you also don't really do much to advance your foreign policy interests. So I think there is a tension.
Thank you. I'm going to go right back to you, and thank you for coming from the UK. And please give my former counterpart at UKEF, Louis Taylor, my regards. I know he's no longer there, but
friend, yes.
Very lovely, lovely person. So BII has long been a pioneer in equity investment, something that most DFIs have avoided. Why does equity, with its patient long-term capital, deliver development impact that debt simply cannot? And should more institutions follow that model?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I mean, I think equity lets you do something that debt doesn't. And what it lets you do is actually create something. And that's more and more where we use equity. We use equity either to create what we call platforms, where we actually start a business. So we started a business called GridWorks that was aimed to develop and fund transmission and distribution in Africa because that business didn't exist. We created a platform called Ayana, which was supposed to develop renewable energy in India because that didn't exist. We own Globelec, which is the largest power developer in Africa. The other place that we use equity a lot is in venture capital, again, so that we can, I spoke about energy and then all the lights dimmed. Was that someone's really good at the Atlantic Council. So, I mean, the other place where we do this is venture capital, because you're building something. But this doesn't come without a cost, I mean, and a lot of costs. So first of all, we have lost a lot of money doing equity, all right? And you don't lose that money when you do debt. Second of all, we have an extremely volatile portfolio by valuation because, I mean, all of our valuations go up and down every year. And the last piece is we don't get the benefits of leverage that a lot of other DFIs, which are set up as banks, can do. They basically take their shareholders' equity, they go out, they raise 3 times as much money, and they can do a lot more debt. So I think it's a little bit of a trade-off. Why do we do it? We do it because we've done it for 75 years. We think we're pretty good at it, and we have a shareholder that has had so many bad news stories about our equity investments that they're somewhat inured to it at the moment. But I think kind of behind that, if you had a DFI that wasn't raising borrowing money and wasn't a bank, should they do equity? And I think we have one of them sitting next to me. And absolutely, DFC should do equity. It shouldn't do a huge amount of equity, but equity should be part of its portfolio, part of its asset allocation. And we look forward to losing money alongside you in the future. So, thanks.
So we will go back to Bethany. Your dual mandate at DFC is to advance U.S. foreign policy and national security strategy and advance economic development through private capital mobilization. How do you bring private investors to the table and balance the conflicting objectives of generating returns and taking on risk?
I mean, the short answer is this is very much on a case-by-case basis. There's really no perfect formula for balancing profit and risk, and it's really highly dependent on the sector in which we're investing, in the region, in the market as well. But for DFC, firstly, we understand that risk is always going to be part of the equation. And again, that is the nature of where we are investing. We are intending to help the private sector go into some of the world's most challenging markets. So by nature, it's going to have a different level of risk across many different factors. And we're not only measuring returns in terms of financial returns. It is very, very important that we are generating financial returns for the American taxpayer. But there's other types of returns that we're increasingly looking at right now, including, advancing our strategic interest of securing supply chains. Are we strengthening American economic security? Are we diversifying away from strategic competitors? So all of those things we are thinking about in terms of positive returns on that as well. And again, as I mentioned before, really for DFC, it's essential that we're helping to get more private capital into these markets. And so our financing and our insurance products are really essential to helping companies to mitigate these risks. Our political risk insurance tool is something that we've utilized in a variety of contexts. And oftentimes there are companies and US companies who are very interested in getting into a certain market. There are very commercially viable opportunities for them. And what they need from a DFC is political risk insurance. They need us to come in so that we can help to insure the risk, whether it is geopolitical, whether it is currency and convertibility, whether it is associated with conflict. So that is where we are seeing an increased interest in our product from companies who are saying, we want to get into these markets, we are accessing other forms of financing, but we're really interested in political risk insurance so that we can really expand there. So again, I think we're really looking at ways that we're balancing risk and return, and not just financial return, but these other strategic returns for the US government.
That's something that I also witnessed at Exim. Exim created an export credit insurance product, and very, very important and helpful, especially to small business. So that's great. Dan, I'm going to do maybe a DOGE-related question. There have been significant structural changes in how U.S. government approaches foreign assistance, as the Deputy Secretary touched on. MCC's programs were closely reviewed. How has the agency changed over the last year and adapted to the current landscape?
Yeah, well, I think I touched on it a little bit earlier. Our portfolio has evolved in important ways. We've stepped back in some countries, we're leaning in others, but also exploring where we can be more intentional in certain sectors. Critical minerals for one, engaging with the US private sector is another. MCC, though, was founded with this single question in mind, and that is, how do we unlock growth? Growth that is good for our partners, growth that is good for the United States. And it's interesting, Colin, the point about this kind of tension that exists, and I do think we do need to be clear about what our objectives are, but well-designed programs, I think particularly in the sectors where MCC's works, energy, roads, et cetera, that you can achieve both of those things. On kind of a practical level, the MCC's statute sets out kind of a framework for the countries that we can work in, and that's both need and merit-based. On the need side, it's essentially around kind of income levels. On the merit side, it's our countries creating the conditions, the policy choices that are conducive to economic growth. That's kind of the baseline. Where we're leaning in this year and building off of Bethany is really this concept of kind of American returns. So MCC is known for its kind of rigorous evidence-based approach. So those aren't just nice words on a paper. We're trying to put some real analytics around growth of US exports, securing our supply chains, benefits to American firms abroad. I heard the Deputy Secretary say those kind of three legs of a stool as well. Our Economic Advisory Council is actually meeting in 2 weeks and is going to poke holes in and stress test that concept of American returns. I'm confident that a couple dozen economists won't be shy about giving us constructive feedback about how we can improve that. But ultimately, that analytic approach is going to complement MCC's cost-benefit analysis and this economic rate of return that we do on every single project. So our board is going to have the benefit of all of that information, both benefits in country and what the returns are for the US as they're considering where and how MCC should be deploying its capital.
Thanks. Jake, you've worked with everyone on this panel. Coming from an outsider perspective, how are U.S. agencies and other nations' DFIs working together? And what can they do to unlock more pioneering investments in emerging markets?
Thanks for that. That's a big question. First of all, everyone on this panel is great, just not as individual, especially as individuals, but also in their organizations. And it's been cool. I've been in the space broadly working in sort of frontier markets for 20 years, working in investment capacity for 15 years. And I think all of them have gotten better at leveraging more of the private sector, better at blended finance. Maybe I'll just highlight a couple things and then where I think the direction of travel is for getting even better. So first with British International Investment, a real focus on using equity as a tool, pioneer transactions. There's a great piece of research out there by Paul Collier, who's an economist at Oxford, showing that pioneer transactions don't just benefit the investor and the investee in that deal, that they have spillover effects, that they have demonstration effects, that they create and break a pathway to make it easier for future entrants. And so the role of DFIs, and I've seen this with BII, in supporting those pioneer transactions is in and of itself a public good. And therefore, an important use of the resources of either taxpayer dollars or philanthropic dollars to catalyze those kind of transactions. And in particular, Colin and BII really pioneered a new platform called ARIA, which is the Africa Resilience Investment Accelerator, focused in Africa, as you might guess, in 7 countries. It's a shared origination, due diligence, and technical assistance platform between 3 different core DFIs, BII, Proparco, the French DFI, and FMO, the Dutch DFI, but also including other DFIs, including DFC, to basically be on-the-ground presence and a shared resource to serve all of those DFIs and lower their costs of entry into those markets. And I know that DFC, for instance, is progressing a transaction in the transport sector that came through ARIA. And so I think it's a great, tangible, practical example of not just talking about more coordination between DFIs, but actually operationalizing it. And I think that ties to the larger question of what more can be done in the U.S. investment and foreign policy apparatus to encourage U.S. investment. The tools, the robustness and capability of the tools is better than ever. DFC reauthorization, going to a $205 billion balance sheet cap. That is a massive potential checkbook. But there's a whole sort of set of things that need to happen to the left of the check. So if you think about a timeline, there's all these things that have to happen before that $100 million check can be written. And that's often where the gap is. The gap is around the origination of the transaction, the vetting of the transaction, linking it to the appropriate sources of capital, and it's usually more than one, and so you have to coordinate between multiple different agencies and the unique processes and requirements of those agencies. Due diligence has to be undertaken. Usually due diligence reveals barriers around the viability and bankability of a transaction, and then you have to put resources against that. And that's where we primarily see the gap in the market right now, is that there's a need for more dedicated bandwidth and resources to enable the large investment to take place. And so I think prioritizing not just having more capital, not just having cheaper capital, but also all those sort of earlier stage transaction costs, coordination costs, and whether it's putting staff time, people against them, increased resourcing so that you can involve advisors of various types. I think that's a really important role, and also plays into this larger sort of enabling environment issue as Dan was talking about as well. But I really do think that, it's definitely not the easiest time to be working at the intersection of investment and development, but I think it is maybe the most interesting time, at least in my lifetime, that I've seen. So I think it's actually quite an exciting moment.
Thank you. I want to turn now to the China Belt and Road Initiative. And the US, UK, and European allies all have been retooling their development finance institutions in response to this. I know when I was at Ex-Im as part of our 2019 congressional reauthorizations, Congress had us stand up a new program called China and Transformational Exports, where we were given the authority to match the rate terms and conditions that the PRC was offering a foreign buyer so that the foreign buyer would hopefully buy American. And I want to just ask your views on what you're doing, and are we offering compelling alternatives? And what have been the biggest challenges in competing with Belt and Road? Let's start here.
So great. Make the Brits start on this one. Look, I think the easy answer is yes, absolutely. We have an offer that is far more compelling than the offer that has been provided to China. And maybe I'll just offer, since we're speaking in generalities, I'll offer an insight about why I don't think China got it right. And we've been talking about this issue, about tensions between national interest, partnership and partner desires, and the needs of our kind of partner country on the ground. And I think China got that wrong. It is absolutely true that an economic partnership should satisfy the national interests of both parties. And there are many transactions that can do that. The problem is that the national interests that you try and satisfy can come in a variety of flavors. It can come in achieving foreign policy aims. It can come in promoting the commercial interests of your own domestic companies. It can come in the form of tied aid, where the procurement basically runs to the purchase of your goods. I think the problem with China is that they got it wrong by asking for everything. So it was Chinese businesses, Chinese goods, and they have been left with a lot of debt and not a lot of foreign policy advantages. Chris Landau put it well. African countries want American companies to be in there. And the reason why is because we know that the choice is with foreign policy interest and their interest. And all of us have moved away from the notion of tied aid and of U.S. contact. And indeed, one of the key parts of the BUILD Act that created DFC was precisely this, precisely removing this U.S. content. And why is that? It is because everyone recognizes that asking for that devalues the currency of your partnership to achieve any foreign policy end. And that's why we've stepped away from it. Europeans may be taking a different row. So how do we get it right? How do we offer something better than the Chinese? Genuine partnership, where we are honest about what our foreign policy aims are, respectful of the interest and aims of our partner, but we don't overload it all with trying to sort of get U.S. content, U.S. contractors, and so forth. I think that's a compelling offer against the Chinese.
I think, the Belt and Road Initiative in China has been a far-reaching initiative across the world, and really with expanding control of in sectors and supply chains and critical minerals and everything. And as Colin had mentioned, doing this through a way that has debt burdened many of the countries in which we are trying to bring and increase investment in. And given the scale of Belt and Road, it's really important that as the U.S. government and as DFC being the investment arm of the U.S. government, that we're offering a compelling alternative. We are not intending to compete on a dollar-for-dollar basis. Even though, as Jake mentioned, our reauthorization enables us, to have a $205 billion balance sheet, we are intending to do very much higher dollar value investments in things like critical minerals and infrastructure. But this is why, our focus is, and our messaging and our intention is, China is, really controlling supply chains, the entire supply chains for natural resources. They're, seeking to control infrastructure on which data moves. And that's something that the U.S. government is doing very differently. So we are offering a different approach to the private sector and to the governments in the countries in which we work. One of the things that we are doing differently, that it is different than China, and I think is very important, is our discussions with governments are on what are your investment priorities? What are you seeking private sector investment? In what sectors are you seeking to grow your economy, and where along the supply chain? What is important to you? For countries that have a lot of natural resources, our discussions are around not just those natural resources, but where are we going to help you build the infrastructure, build the roads, build the energy infrastructure, look at the entire value chain of things. So really, these discussions, as Colin has mentioned, are more of partnership. We are investing because we do want to advance US interests, but at the same time, we can advance, and we intend to advance economic development and create jobs in the sectors in which countries want to increase investment. So that's really important. I think another factor that distinguishes us and has been something that's very important to the United States is continued high standards. So we have standards on workers' rights. We have standards on environmental standards. We also focus on the importance of due diligencing our financing from the very beginning and throughout. We are working with countries on assessing geopolitical risks and how taking this into account as part of our due diligence. So these are all things that we are doing as not competing on a dollar for dollar, but it's really important for the United States that we are looking to secure supply chains, work directly with governments on their investment priorities, and ensure in things like ICT investments and digital technologies that we are working with them to understand the importance of investments in high standards and also technologies, that are going to bring benefits to them and not detract from what they're trying to do in their economies.
Before I go to Dan, I just want to comment on that a little bit. Thank you so much. I found at Ex-Im, speaking with purchasers or countries around the world, they also love, for America, how well made our products are, goods and services are. The quality also matters. And engaging with the local employment matters. Instead of just bringing all Chinese workers to do a project, that you actually engage the people on the ground there to be involved in the projects. But I'm curious, big frustration for me, even today still, because I'm a big champion of what we're talking about today, is reading in the newspaper, not in the newspaper, online. I do, Google alerts every day of all these deals that are happening with China in country X. New bridge, new radar system for airport, new this, new that, like ribbon cuttings, et cetera. And I'm just curious, given the Deputy Secretary's interest in this as well, how are we doing a better job as Americans of getting there and learning about those opportunities before we read about it in the news? Do you have any insights on how that process is working now?
I think one of the things that we're doing is a couple things. So one, we have overseas offices. So DFC does have staff in multiple regions across the world, including through cross-boundary. And why is that important? That's important because we really need to have people who are in the markets understanding what the private sector needs are in the markets, understanding the market intelligence. So that has been something that we are hoping to expand because it is so critical for us to really understand what investments are coming, what concessions, what tenders are coming up within these markets, what the private sector needs from a financing standpoint. The other thing that we're doing is, and again, reflective of the State Department's focus on commercial diplomacy, is we are working hand in hand with our ambassadors and our embassies and the teams there with our Foreign Commercial Service and the other agencies that are based in these embassies, again, to really understand these markets, to really learn early on through the ambassador and embassies' engagements with the governments on the ground, with the private sector on the ground, to understand what are the forthcoming opportunities so that we can make sure we are aware of procurements of tenders and concessions that are coming up that we can help bring the private sector there, that we can say, okay, DFC financing can come along on this. But it really is a market intelligence, and it really is understanding what are those opportunities, because that is a way we really need to compete with China there.
I guess my former Exim Chief of Staff, David Fogel, is now at the Commerce Department as the head of the U.S. and Foreign Commercial Service, and we chat regularly, and he knows firsthand how important it is to be present there, and you learn about things by not necessarily having the world come to us here, even though we're in a very modern age of technology, but you've got to be there to know what's happening and get a good chance to do great things for your country and prosperity. Okay, Dan, you want to build on this?
Yeah, I won't repeat everything Bethany just said, which I will ascribe myself to those comments, and I think a lot of these points have been made. But we're not going to compete dollar for dollar, but we do have a unique value proposition, and that's both the what and the how. In MCC's case, the what is quality infrastructure, world-class infrastructure, high standards. They know what they're getting in that. I think the how is this partnerships piece. With MCC in particular, there is a lot of local ownership, shared interest, shared costs, transparency, skin in the game. That is going to lead to better outcomes. One kind of unique thing that I'll add from MCC's point of view, though, is the scorecard that we have, and we're here at this forum and launching a new indicator that James and others have put a lot of work into. MCC does have a scorecard by which we are trying to measure the policy environments and whether these countries are trying to make progress on these things. And so what we see actually is that countries, they do really want to partner with the US. They are making strides using this scorecard as kind of a roadmap for reform and making strides without a single US taxpayer dollar being spent. They are improving on some of these indicators to qualify for MCC assistance. That is a really important kind of signaling effect as well to the private sector. I think that, hey, this is a country, this is a market that is trying to do the right thing. And so, again, it's the what we offer, but also how we do it that I think makes MCC and the US government stand out.
Jake?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot has been well covered by my fellow panelists. You know, I think in the competition with China on potential transactions, yeah, I think, you know, we're not trying to compete, you know, dollar for dollar, you know, in the exact same level of speed, because that would be foolhardy against sort of a state-directed, politically driven effort. But that is also the weakness of the approach from China. Because when you have politically driven projects, that's when you end up with these sort of white elephant projects. You end up with airports, you know, next to the politician's hometown, but not where there's necessarily any passenger demand. You end up with ports, you know, that don't make sense or oversized or undersized, you know, based on political considerations. And so the fact that, you know, the U.S. and other partners can bring and are bringing in the private sector, a rigorous private sector lens that has to know that they are actually going to get that capital back, that they're going to see a rate of return from that capital, brings a level of accountability and transparency and long-term thinking into these projects that you don't get when they're more politically driven. And I think the other thing, frankly, and Deputy Secretary Landau mentioned it as well, is actually in addressing corruption. The reality is there are certain state-driven actors out there that are much more free about paying bribes, and that has very negative consequences, not just for the deal, but in that economy. It exacerbates corruption, it creates more rent-seeking behavior, and so having you know, investors come in that are accountable to the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the UK Bribery Act, you know, that are accountable and have to do business the right way, that is a win for the country as well. And we've seen that play out in real time in many African countries, for instance, where we invest, where, you know, the politician might think it's better to have, you know, the payoffs, but there's all these knock-on effects that make the long-term environment worse. I do want to touch on one other thing, which is, as Deputy Secretary Landau asked, why is the U.S. private sector not more present in these economies already? A big reason, honestly, is that the U.S. economy has been phenomenal. You have been able to get very, very good returns simply in the U.S. public markets or the private markets And so there hasn't been the same imperative compared potentially to other countries to take that capital abroad. But that is, I think, short-sighted, because as you can see right now in things like critical minerals or having resilient supply chains, the need for multiple transport routes, all the ways that how the rest of the world's economy matters to the American citizens, that sort of underinvestment or underengagement abroad does have consequences. But part of it is simply the reality that the returns in the U.S. have been quite good. And so I think that does mean, whether it's from the think tank perspective or it's from the government perspective, we need to be really actively encouraging and making it easier for the U.S. private sector to look at these markets. From an awareness perspective, from accessing the different tools, to serving up deals and having deal rooms and forms and investment pipeline, to make these opportunities as easy to invest in as investing in another project in the Midwest. Because I think there is that sort of initial risk aversion, and there's initial transaction costs to entering the markets. But there are, as I think our firm and others can attest, there are great opportunities to build a business in these markets, and we need to make that case to U.S. businesses.
I'm from West Virginia, rural West Virginia, and I'm so happy to see in the audience today Roger Hanshaw, who is our Speaker of the House of Delegates in West Virginia. And that just takes me to what I cared so much about at Ex-Im and still today. How do we help our small businesses thrive in the global marketplace and start from scratch and develop into great thriving businesses? Do you have any observations on how we can help do that connection a little bit better?
I think actually it's gotten easier due primarily to technology for U.S. small businesses, SMEs, to access these global markets. In terms of your ability to market your product, in terms of fintech or text-based logistics platforms that make it easier for you to navigate the sort of trade and regulatory processes necessary to get your goods into market, to finance those goods. I think there's a lot of interesting innovation, around stable coins and other things that can lower the transaction costs of foreign exchange and money flowing in various directions. And AI as well. AI makes it easier to translate your product into another language, to submit all the forms perhaps that might be necessary to be compliant and enter a new market. And so I think really embracing that sort of interconnectedness and how tech enables that could be a great advantage for U.S. companies going abroad.
That's great. Anyone else have any observations on small business? Okay. I'm going to try technology. Let's see if I can put a question up on the screen. I don't know. It says ready, go live. Is it? Let's see. Okay, it's not up on the screen, so I'm going to read it. This is from Boyan Mitrakev, KRIB. Do you see Southeastern Europe, especially Bulgaria, Romania, as important for DFC and other GSEs to invest in critical minerals, shale gas exploration, and other areas? Anyone want to take that?
Sure. So that is a region where we're actually looking at several energy opportunities and looking at nuclear, looking at other forms of energy. So it's something that is important to us. I mentioned that we're working in every region of the world, but within every different region, we have, certainly there are sectors where we are going to focus a little more heavily. And in these in particular, we're really looking at critical minerals, but we're also looking at energy and really focusing on energy and related infrastructure there. So markets where we're open for opportunities, and we are currently doing business development to get more opportunities.
That's great. And I didn't get to speak to her, but I saw former ambassador to Poland, Georgette Mosbacher, last night. She's very involved with the Atlantic Council. I didn't get to speak with her, but I had a fond memory of staying at her residence in December of 2020 as we worked on the topic of nuclear, as well as in Romania as far as Ex-Im goes. And so I really hope when it comes to clean energy and providing more electricity and opportunities for everywhere in the world that we do more nuclear. Does anyone else want to comment on nuclear projects? No. Okay. Let's see, I really wanted to chat with Colin on a topic that I also had to deal with at Ex-Im, and that is blended finance is everywhere in this conversation. But critics say it often subsidizes private investors who would have come anyway to the deal, or distorts markets in developing countries. How do you answer this critique?
So I think the direct answer is that blended finance done well unlocks deals that wouldn't otherwise happen. And blended finance done poorly is nothing more than a subsidy to an investor who would have invested otherwise. But actually implicit in that question, I think, is this general notion that blended finance has somehow proven a failure. And so maybe if I could take a few moments to address that, because blended finance is everywhere. Now, it was unlikely that blended finance was ever going to satisfy the unreasonable expectations that had been set up in this sort of billions to trillions kind of narrative. But why it hasn't delivered on those expectations is an example of when economic theory falls foul of financial reality. Because the economic theory would tell you that if you reduce risk, that clearly investors will come in and make the investment if you're providing the same return. I mean, that's efficient market theory, that's, Econ 101. But the reason why it doesn't work is twofold. The first is that there are a lot of aspects to an investment that are not addressed by blended finance that are still putting off investors. So that's long tenors, illiquidity, immature capital markets, and the absence of a pipeline. And the other piece that I don't think anyone fully understood is the institutional culture of an investment house. And investors aren't investing because this is not an asset class. This is a feature of an asset. Second of all, it is not, you can't do it at scale. It's not replicable. Every one of these investments are the same. Third, investment houses are very loath to set up the capacity to sort of evaluate these investments and monitor them, for a handful of these investments in kind of strange, faraway places. And I think that, the Deputy Secretary of State was absolutely right, that there is a misapprehension of risk, and that plays out in this institutional culture. That having been said, I think blended finance, where it is done right, has been absolutely transformative, and people just take it for granted. So political risk insurance has been revolutionary and has made a massive difference, not the least in Ukraine. The development finance subordinated debt tranches in project finance are ubiquitous. They make deals bankable that wouldn't exist, and they are a feature of project finance. So there are quite a lot of these places. Blended finance works well. It's just not the panacea that everyone thought it might be.
Have you written on this? Because I really want you to write a piece on this.
I've written too much on blended finance.
on this
We'll write it
distortion.
together. Why don't we do that?
Okay. As Ex-Im goes into its next reauthorization. From the private sector, do you have any views on this?
Yeah, I mean, so and Colin has written a lot, so you should check it out.
I was prompting him to do a new article relevant to Ex-Im's reauth.
Maybe you can even write it jointly. So I wrote something a couple years ago, and the title was "Every Deal is a Blended Finance Deal." Because every deal has externalities that affect public goods. Whether we talk about them or not, any investment that you make is affecting various public goods where it might have a knock-on effect on the cleanliness of the air or the education in that area, or ancillary spillovers to suppliers. There's all of this. Every deal has these sort of externalities, and therefore every deal has opportunities or risks from public regulation or incentives, from philanthropic incentives. And that happens at the deal level. It also happens at a meta level, through public policy often. A tax credit is a form of blended finance. If you look at One Big Beautiful Bill, there's all these types of blended finance incentives or disincentives embedded in that. And so I think we should just be talking about it generally, because it's not as if there was this silo where these like pure play, private equity deals that only have to think about the commercial considerations exist. You have to think about the implications, whether it's for, resilient supply chains or national security or for the environment. You have to think about these in almost any transaction that you enter. And I think if we widen that sphere, we can see that it's a continuum. And so when we're working on a blended finance transaction, say for health or agriculture with a foundation in Africa, that exists on the same continuum as the Office of Strategic Capital at the Department of War taking an equity stake in a critical minerals mine or processor, because they see that as imperative to national security. All of these are driven by mission-driven capital, basically, that is seeking something beyond just the IRR, beyond just the internal rate of return on the project.
So to close us out, I want to, again, thank James and the staff of the Freedom and Prosperity Center. Let's leave them with some thinking for a decade from now. What do you think success will look like? And how will we know if investment development finance actually achieve the strategic objectives we're setting today? So let's start with Dan.
Sure. There's a tendency to kind of focus on the next shiny thing. And so this is going to be a long-term game. This is going to be having the kind of patience to be thinking in the long term. Of course, there's immediate demands and we want to move quickly, but a feature of MCC, for example, is having know your funds thinking in 5-year terms in terms of compacts. I think to address some of these sorts of challenges, thinking regionally is another. So I would just offer that basically we want to be mindful of the current moment, but we need to be also thinking, as you said, it's a bit short-sighted if we're not thinking about some of these other emerging markets in certain ways, despite some of the opportunities here at home. So we need to be thinking on that 5-10-year horizon, not just today.
I think a couple of things. One, you've heard a lot of us here talk about supply chain resiliency, and I think success will be that we do have more resilient supply chains across multiple sectors: critical minerals, digital technologies, transportation and logistics. That we through DFC have advanced U.S. interests through private capital mobilization, but we've also worked to increase economic development and increase jobs in the markets in which we are working. I think another element that would show success would be that these different markets in different countries, again, because they've had more private sector investment, are able to weather more geopolitical shocks that we're seeing happening across the world. And again, that ties to supply chain resilience. So a lot of those things I think would be success from a private sector investment perspective and also from a U.S. interest perspective.
I'll offer two. So the first one would be that rating agencies begin to rate emerging market companies on their own merits and without capping them by the sovereign rate ceilings. I think that'd be a huge step forward for investment. And the second one, because I got into this for development, I would love in my career to see at least one African low-income country graduate to be a lower middle-income country.
Great. I would echo a lot of that. I think to the theme of this forum, I think it is such an interesting time to be working at the intersection of prosperity and governance. I went to grad school and I did a joint MBA and Master's in Public Policy, and it's just a fascinating time because you really see how these skill sets need to come together. And it's obvious that right now we're in a world, it is a reset moment. It is maybe a 1947 type moment where a lot of the international institutions are being reset. Nothing's on autopilot, which is of course scary and challenging in some ways, but also means that no one has to feel like they're a cog in the machine. That the opportunity for individuals, for talented leaders to really make a difference in shaping what the future architecture of investment is and what countries can graduate and see the prosperity that we've enjoyed here in the US. I think it is the most interesting and potentially impactful time, for the audience in this room and elsewhere to be playing that role.
To the panel, thank you very much, and let's hope for great things.